Yeah. Okay. All right. Welcome back. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concord University's Fourth Space, and thank you for joining us for today's event, CIREQ Interdisciplinary PhD Student Symposium on Climate Change. Now, to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube. We are live from Fourth Space, and we are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things in development across the university and its community. And we're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting, so we welcome, encourage questions and comments in the chat if you're joining us there. Those of you here in the space, you were probably here yesterday, so you probably know we will get a microphone to you when you most definitely do have questions. And with that, it's my pleasure to pass the microphone over to PhD candidate and co-organizer of this event series, Laure Gosselin. Welcome.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the second day of the CIREQ Interdisciplinary PhD Conference on the Environment and Climate Change. So I am happy to start the discussion with our second roundtable entitled Towards More Sustainable Food Systems in Canada, from Policy to Field and from Farm to Fork. So the reason why we wanted to talk about this today is that our agri-food systems are major sources of pollution and biodiversity loss, as you might know. Canada's agricultural sector is contributing to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions in the country, but these systems also offer opportunities for more sustainable food production and consumption. So the aim of this roundtable is to explore how to develop sustainable food systems in Canada and the roles of various stakeholders, including governments, farmers, consumers, and the food industry. So to help us navigate this topic, we have invited 4 speakers with very diverse backgrounds and expertise from academia, but also from professionals working on these topics. So I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Darrin Qualman, who is Director of Climate Crisis Policy and Action at the National Farmers Union. So Mr. Qualman will bring us an account of our food systems from a farmer's perspective. So Mr. Qualman, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. I'll just share my screen here. Just need to get back to the beginning. Sorry about that. Can you see my slides okay?
Yes, we can see them.
Very good. Thank you. So yes, I work for the National Farmers Union. I work out of an office in Saskatoon. This morning I'm zooming in from the place I used to farm, and I still live in Saskatchewan. That's a picture taken earlier this year when things were a little cooler. It's very rainy and great growing season this year. So my presentation has 5 parts. I want to connect some dots between some of the focus coming from the Government of Canada and the markets to how farmers react, how food systems react, and how that then affects sustainability. So I'll just start. It's been said a few times that the Government of Canada has a very, very strong focus on export maximization. Many times over the last couple decades, the government has set export targets for agri-food, and farmers have met them, and no sooner were those met than new targets were set. And what we've seen over the last couple of generations is a very rapid increase in agri-food exports. So rapid, in fact, that they're actually doubling every 16 years. We've got very rapid exponential growth in agri-food exports, and a very firm focus on that as one of the primary targets for Canadian agriculture. And I think other speakers are going to talk about some things that are happening now, about attempts to diversify those targets and bring more sustainability targets and more of a focus on sustainability and emissions reduction. But for the last couple generations, at least, the focus has really been on maximizing agri-food exports. Now, that push to maximize exports coming from the government, but also a push to maximize production coming from the markets and processors and others in the system, has led farmers to respond and increase production very quickly. So Grains and oilseed production in Canada doubling every 44 years. You can see the shape of the curve, exponential increase. This is chicken meat production. It's doubling every 30 years. Pork meat production, too, doubling every 30 years. And I could show you a whole bunch of other graphs, potatoes, etc. And a lot of the output in Canada is doubling every 20, 30, 40 years. Now, this push to maximize output is leading to a push to maximize input use, or at least a tendency to maximize input use, because the way we push more grains, oil seeds, and meat out of the system is to push more inputs in, and one of the main inputs is fertilizer. Fertilizer is the main way we push energy into the food system. It's not fuel in our tractors, it's actually natural gas into fertilizer, into fields, into expanded crop output. This is nitrogen fertilizer input tonnage in Canada, again, doubling 28 years for fertilizer. Another input that we're using a lot more of is pesticides. It's the tonnage of pesticides going into the system is doubling every 13 years. And fuel as well. Fuel is doubling every 30 years. This is a graph of diesel fuel use in agriculture. It's doubling every 30 years. So I think you see the theme. Everything in agriculture is doubling every 20, 30, 40 years. We're pushing a lot more inputs in, and that's the way that we push a lot more tonnage of agri-food out the other end. Now, not surprising, this increasing input use is driving up emissions, and agricultural emissions are up by more than 40% over the last 30 years. This is a complex graph, and I'd invite you to go to the NFU website, nfu.ca, and we have graphs of greenhouse gas emissions, and this is probably the most comprehensive and detailed assessment of GHGs from agriculture that's been produced, and I won't go into the detail here, of course, but just note that top line rising from about 58 million tons in 1990 to well over 80 million tons right now. And the reason that those emissions are going up is because the emissions coming out of agriculture are a direct function of the inputs going in. If you push more petro-industrial, petroleum-derived inputs into one end, not surprisingly, you get more emissions coming out the other end. And a key takeaway from this is that if emissions coming out are a function of the inputs going in, then if you want a low emission system, you're going to need a low input system. And that means increasingly as we move forward through the 2030s, 2040s, and toward 2050, and when we've committed to net zero, we're going to have to find alternatives to petro-industrial inputs. And if we do that, it'll help slow the decline in sustainability. So just to kind of wrap up the assessment of agri-food system sustainability, I think I've showed that agriculture is increasingly dependent on inputs that are depleting, petroleum-derived inputs that are depleting. The use of agricultural inputs is doubling and redoubling, often on an exponential curve. One of the outcomes here is that emissions into the air and water from chemicals and fertilizers is increasing. So it's not just greenhouse gas emissions, it's also ammonia, leaching of nitrates into groundwater, etc. And of course, greenhouse gas emissions are increasing. And I think the inescapable conclusion here is, and I want to just underline this first part, like all other human systems, agriculture is not unique here, and I'm not in any way indicting agriculture and what it's doing, but it's part of a larger economic system around the world. Transport, mining, forestry, manufacturing, housing, etc. All of these systems are becoming less and less sustainable. And like those other systems, Canadian agriculture is currently unsustainable, and it's moving away from sustainability, not toward it. And I think if you see a system that's using twice as much fuel, twice as much chemical, twice as much fertilizer, that's really the only assessment that you can draw. But again, this isn't something that's unique to agriculture. It's something that every part of our economy is doing. Just to kind of put this in a larger global context, some of you will know the work of Rockstrom and Stefan and others around planetary boundaries and the safe operating space for planet Earth. And if you look at this graphic from one of the recent reports, if you go down to near the bottom, kind of the 7 o'clock position, biogeochemical flows, N and P are nitrogen and phosphorus. You can see they're far outside the green area. They're far outside the yellow. They're into sort of the red and the purple. We've very dramatically breached the safe operating space for planet Earth when it comes to nitrogen and phosphorus inputs. We've actually, and this is quite astounding, tripled the amount of nitrogen that flows through the terrestrial biosphere, tripled the amount of nitrogen flowing through the land area of Earth when we compare to the pre-industrial period. Phosphorus equally. If you go up to about the 11 o'clock position, biosphere integrity, that's the loss of species, etc. And then up at the 12 o'clock position, CO2 concentrations and climate change. And agriculture is part of a lot of those transgressions of planetary boundaries. If we had a lot more time, we could talk about how agriculture will be parts of the solutions, and perhaps the other speakers can do that. But in 10 minutes, I'm just laying out some of the problems and challenges we have here. And finally, I'll show one more graph, and this is the one that really keeps me awake at night. This is a graph showing the last 50,000 years of animal biomass on Earth. You've all, no, I will not remember the name of the researcher that put together this data. But just very quickly, 3 periods are shown: 50,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, and today. The brown bars are the biomass of wild animals on Earth, and you can see the very rapid decrease. The blue bar is the mass of humans on Earth, and the tan bar is the mass of livestock on Earth. And we're to a point now where humans and our livestock are about 97% of the biomass on the planet, and we've reduced land mammals to about 3%. So I think we have very significant sustainability issues here. More information in a number of reports from the National Farmers Union, including a lot of solutions, transformative solutions to the problems I've outlined: agroecology, food sovereignty, replacing industrial inputs with biological systems. So there are lots of solutions. And I'll just also note a book that I published in 2019 that takes a really big picture, 10,000 year look at a lot of these issues, called Civilization Critical. So thank you very much.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Qualman, for setting the scene for us and linking what's happening in Canadian food systems to the global problem also that we have with how our food systems work. So to continue the discussion, let me introduce you to Dr. Sandra Znajda, who is Deputy Director in charge of Climate Policy and Partnerships at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So Dr. Znajda holds a PhD from Dalhousie University, and she's now in charge of developing Canada's new sustainable agricultural strategy. So you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thanks very much. Let me just share my slides here. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Great, thanks. Well, thanks very much for having me here today. As mentioned, I did my interdisciplinary PhD at Dalhousie University, and it's really forums like these that are great for inspiring those cross-disciplinary linkages and looking for those types of solutions that cross-discipline. So very happy to see this kind of a forum here. I'm going to focus my remarks on work that we're doing at Agriculture Canada that's looking for solutions to some of what Darrin has just set up there. So we're working on a sustainable agriculture strategy for Canada for the past couple of years. And I think it's safe to say everybody can understand the complexity of our food system and the intricate linkages across economic, social, and environmental spheres. Darrin set up a lot of the challenges that are facing our food sector, our food system in Canada today. You know, we're really facing a triple challenge of being able to produce healthy food for domestic and international consumers in a way that farmers can have a good livelihood in terms of what they're growing, and in a way of doing that's environmentally sustainable. And we know that agriculture relies on a resilient and healthy environment to function, and that different types of farming practices have an impact on biodiversity, on water, on GHG emissions. So agriculture is really part of the challenge, but it's also part of the solution. And this strategy is an opportunity to bring everyone together to tackle some of these challenges and really set a path forward for sustainability. So just to give a bit of an overview of the strategy that is still under development, the plan is for it to set a shared direction for collective action to improve environmental performance in the sector. And it's taking an integrated and coordinated approach. So while there are 5 priority areas that you can see in the circle there on the slide, it's really recognizing the linkages across those priority areas and how solutions for one, such as GHG emission reduction, has impacts and co-benefits on the other aspects of the circle as well. And of course, the interlinkages across social, environment, and economic spheres. The strategy is really aiming to build from successes that have been achieved to date. So, for example, soil health has really increased in the prairies, and our prairie soils have gone from being a carbon source to a carbon sink. I know Darrin talked a little bit about the increases in production, but over the last decade at least, even though those increases in production have occurred, our GHG emissions have stayed stable. So there is a lot of work done to improve production and reduce GHG emissions, or at least, you know, decouple those two factors. And the strategy is really going to communicate a shared direction through goals, measurable outcomes, and then look at all the tools in the toolbox for these solutions. And that's everything from the importance of information and knowledge exchange, not top down, but in a peer-to-peer learning kind of environment. Data solutions so that we can measure progress and inform decision-making at all levels, both in the fields and for policy and programs for various governments. Looking at direct and indirect financial incentives that producers need in order to adopt sustainable practices or change their practices. Market-based mechanisms that offer that pull for producers because they're getting a benefit for adopting sustainable practices and producing sustainable products. And the research that's really needed to go into finding new solutions, because it takes 20 years to even identify and put into practice new solutions. So in developing the strategy, we carried out a substantial amount of engagement and consultation. Throughout 2023, we spent a lot of time speaking to producers, to producer associations, NGOs, Indigenous partners, provinces and territories. We had virtual workshops with producers, virtual workshops with stakeholders. We visited and took our presentation and our questions to a variety of different organizations and agencies in the sector. We also established a multi-stakeholder advisory committee in December of 2022, and we've been working closely with representatives of that group, including the National Farmers Union, meeting every 2 weeks in 2023, every month this year, really giving that opportunity for multi-stakeholder perspectives, getting input, testing ideas, helping to shape the strategy. And all of this engagement has really helped us gain a sense of priorities from the different actors in the sector, to really kind of bring to light some of the considerations we might not have thought of, And it's also served to raise interest, raise that momentum, and that engagement which we'll need for actual implementation, because in order to be successful, in order to really advance sustainability in the sector, it needs all actors across the food system to be engaged and collaborating. It's not just something the federal government can do. It's not just something farmers can do. It's really all actors in the sector. And this engagement is going to continue through the advisory committee until it's developed. And then, of course, throughout implementation, we'll continue on engaging the strategy. This is just a bit of a summary of some of the key themes that emerged from the engagement. So certainly the recognition of the need for a balanced approach. We can't take it just environment by itself. We need to look at environment within the economic and social context and really apply that lens. I'll speak a little bit more about the one-size approach not working, but really making sure that sustainability solutions have flexibility for the different producers, different actors in the sector. We certainly heard a lot about the need for knowledge transfer and more information so that producers can make decisions that are best for their farm, given the unique contexts. And data has always it's come up over and over again about not having sufficient data being fragmented, both at the farm levels. The producers really know what the benefits are of certain practices, how it's going to impact them economically, how it's going to impact environmentally, and then at higher levels as well in terms of decision makers who are making policies, who are making programs, so they have the right information about agro-environmental issues to be able to make those decisions. So I wanted to share too just some of the considerations and challenges that go into making such a complex policy, such as the Sustainable Agriculture Strategy. So agriculture has some unique characteristics compared to other sectors, and if we look at economic sectors, right? So there's over 200,000 farms in Canada. These are farmers operating in unique micro ecosystems. They have regional contexts. There's different political contexts. They're all growing different products. They're different scales. We have small, medium, large scale farmers, some engaged in export, some not. So there's such a diversity. There's definitely no one size fits all approach to sustainability in the sector. And that's something that we're really bringing home in the SAS. Farmers are also business owners first. So that's something that we've been reminded over and over again to take into consideration, because adopting a sustainable practice for many farmers is not going to be practical if it doesn't make economic sense for them. Like, this is their livelihood, this is their business, and that's top of mind. A lot of these production practices that we're talking about transitioning to sustainable practices, they can take several years to show benefits. And that's something that we also need to help manage the risks that farmers are taking for adopting something that is new, that may not show benefits to them either economically or environmentally for 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And when we're looking at GHG emissions, have to keep in mind that the majority of emissions in agriculture are not from burning of fossil fuels like you see in housing or transportation. These are biological emissions from the animals, from the landscape. It means that we can't work with a small number of big emitters. It's really hard to measure. It's not coming from one source. It just makes it more complex to work with and to measure in progress and change. And then there's also the policy context we're working in is also presents both challenges and opportunities. Agriculture is a shared jurisdiction, so that means that provinces and territories have a larger share of responsibility for a lot of the natural resources when it comes to water, soil, land use management, and planning. And that means that a lot of collaboration has to happen across those different levels of government. We have a 5-year federal, provincial, territorial agricultural agreements that are put into place. This outlines policy and program priorities for federal, provincial, and territorial governments. And that takes 2 years to negotiate. It's an incredibly intensive process. So not to say that this can't happen, but just the complexity of the collaboration that's needed needs to be taken into consideration there. And there's also opportunities that we need to leverage. Right now, climate change is a big priority internationally and federally. Canada has ambitious GHG emissions targets. This is really good timing. There's a lot of support for environmental policy in the ag sector. There's a lot of momentum that's happening as well. Industry, food companies, they're making sustainability commitments, GHG reduction commitments. A lot of action has been happening, especially over the last couple of years. And consumers are also demanding more sustainable food and agri-food products, both here in Canada and abroad. So that momentum is also something that we can leverage and grow and build on. And then last, I'll just say that, big change takes time. What we're talking a lot about is changing norms and changing values and changing behaviors. And that's that very human aspect of sustainability that Darrin had commented on at the end of his presentation there. I keep thinking that, 30 years ago when I remember sitting in my doctor's office as he chain smoked as he was going over my files. And that's something that would be absolutely absurd today. But it took 30 years or more for our society to change their views on smoking. So that's the kind of thing that takes time. And in the agriculture sector, that transition from no-till, so from tilling, so turning the soil every year before you plant, to no-till, which is the current dominant practice in the prairies, and that was a key factor in improving soil health and turning our prairie soils from a carbon source to a carbon sink. It took 20 years to occur as well. And there was a lot of information sharing and farmer to farmer learning that needed to happen in order for that shift to change. So these big changes take time, and there's still a lot of big questions and big trade-offs to think through and work through. So just to wrap up and looking forward, we're anticipating the release of the Sustainable Agriculture Strategy before the end of this year. But just to point out, it's very much an evergreen strategy. So it's being developed so that it will have the ability to evolve over time as new information becomes available, as new partnerships are built, new technologies identified, new ideas are kind of brought forward and become more dominant and prominent. And the hope is that it will increase in ambition over time as well. And then implementation is very much, like I said before, a collective effort. So all actors in the sector have a role to play. And the strategy is really meant to incentivize that action and incentivize those collaborations and partnerships that are needed to really reach those sustainability goals and outcomes that are documented in the strategy. So those are at the end of my remarks. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Znajda. And you mentioned rightly implementation, so I think we will look at that a bit more with our next speaker, who is Mr. Chris McPhee, also from the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. He is an innovation management specialist, and he will tell us about the Living Labs approach, which is one of the initiatives that the government is implementing to develop solutions that address urgent agri-environmental issues. So you have the floor for 10 minutes, Mr. McPhee.
Merci, Lo. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure. And so we've heard some very powerful statements about the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing, the urgency for it, and really the need for solutions. And I think that's really, I'm going to be talking about the search for solutions, I would say, but the message was pretty clear from our first two presentations that there's no single solution or no single approach that's going to get us where we need to be in terms of sustainable agriculture. But nonetheless, I'm going to be talking about one of the approaches for solutions that we're using in agriculture and agri-food Canada, and that is the Living Labs approach. So when we look back at where we were in 2018, AFC, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, recognized that urgent action was needed to accelerate our response to climate change and other agro-environmental challenges. And so it was at that point we set out to start building a nationwide network of living labs to help accelerate the development and adoption of sustainable practices by Canadian farmers. And in terms of what Living Labs are all about, or the why we chose Living Labs, it's because a Living Labs is an approach to agricultural innovation that really brings together all these different actors that were mentioned in the previous presentations, bringing together farmers, scientists, and other partners to really co-develop solutions and bring their perspectives to the challenge. this approach also gives you an opportunity to refine those solutions so that they're more likely to be adopted, so they're a better fit for the farmer's needs. The living labs have been used in a lot of different contexts, and they always have these three core principles: user-centered innovation, working in partnership, and testing in the real-life context. So when we talk about user-centered innovation, this means that all of the activities in a living lab are focused on the user's needs. In our case, the users are farmers, and that means the farmers are involved throughout the development process. It's not something where we just go and talk to them at the beginning and find out their problems and then go away and try to come up with solutions. They're active participants throughout that process, and everyone's looking at what their needs are and trying to find solutions that will meet those needs. But it's not just farmers involved. You have a variety of different partners all bringing their expertise to the challenge, various disciplines and backgrounds tackling a common issue. That's why this this sort of fits so well with the conference that you're having in terms of this interdisciplinary approach, because that's really what this is all about. And then when you have some solutions that you think might address those needs, you go and test them in the real life context where they would actually be used by the users. So in our context, that means going onto real farms with the farmers, testing the practices. Scientists are conducting experiments to learn more about them at the same time. And then we take that information, we put it into an innovation cycle, which we identify these steps. We have this sort of the first step of co-develop, where we're basically identifying the needs of the farmers, looking at what kind of outcomes we're looking for, generating ideas and sharing those. This is really the kind of creative step there. And then going out into the field, testing those practices, conducting those experiments, acquiring different kinds of data and new kinds of knowledge, and then taking stock of what happened, evaluating those results and all the different types of data. So there's a lot of biophysical data, but also social sciences data, the user experiences with those practices, and feeding that into a subsequent round of co-development to improve those practices. And over time, as you do a number of these cycles, you're learning more about the practices, how well they're working, but also you're learning how well they're fitting the user's needs and how likely they would be to be adopted. And the idea is that through subsequent iterations, these solutions will be more likely to be adopted by other farmers who might not have been involved in the living lab, but they're kind of pre-tested and pre-shaped to ensure they meet farmers' needs. That's the approach at a relatively abstract level. How we've put it into practice in terms of a program level is we've had two different programs that have used the Living Labs approach. We had, starting in 2018, under our Living Laboratories initiative, we built 4 living labs in PEI, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. And these were focused relatively broadly on agro-environmental issues. And that was a 5-year program. But then, starting in 2021, we started a rapid scaling up of this work under a new program called Agricultural Climate Solutions. And here the goal was, as I say, to scale up. So we were looking at going from 4 to 14 living labs. The goal was to have at least 1 living lab in every province in Canada, and that's what we have now. And this program is very specifically focused on developing solutions that are focused on increasing the sequestration of carbon in agricultural soils and reducing greenhouse gas emissions through those practices and providing other environmental co-benefits. And this is now a 10-year program going from 2021 to 2031. And all of our living labs are now under that program. And both of these, as I say, both of these programs, what they really have in common is they follow the same Living Labs approach. I'll very briefly give a quick recap of the Living Laboratories Initiative. That was the first program that we had. And so we were looking, as I say, at broader issues. We were looking at improving soil and water conservation, maximizing habitat capacity and biodiversity, reducing water contamination, mitigating and adapting to climate change. And over the lifespan of that program, there were about 50 different beneficial management practices that were co-developed and worked on in this collaborative innovation approach. And then when we moved to agricultural climate solutions, this is a broader program. It actually has two streams. One is the On-Farm Climate Action Fund, where we're basically saying, there are certain practices we have a certain level of confidence about that we would like to encourage their adoption immediately of the existing practices, and that's the On-Farm Climate Action Fund. And then we have the Living Lab stream, where this is really the innovation stream, where we're trying to come up with those new solutions. And this is, as I say, this is the 10-year program and focused on carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emissions. So we've been through this rapid scaling up over a relatively short period of time. We've gone from an initial network of 4 living labs to 14. We went from a 5-year funding horizon to 10 years, and we've rapidly scaled up the number of people involved. So now that we have over 1,000 people directly involved in all of this work across the country, that's about 300 producers, for example, and about 250 scientists in that 1,000 people, and a lot of others are representing different partner organizations, because we now have more than 150 of those. Our research centers are actively involved in all of this work, of course, and we see quite a significant increase in funding, accounting for the scaling up of the number of living labs and the longer time horizon, and a lot more of innovations that we're working on across the country. And it is this national approach that we're taking. We're looking at a lot of these living labs, they're focused on very place-based action, very local actions for what suits the context. But then these are not 14 independent projects. We're treating them as a network and encouraging knowledge exchange within the living lab, but then also across the network. So we have, as I say, this network approach across those 14 living labs, a number of working groups, a number of sort of annual events to bring together the network and encourage that exchange at a national level. And then we have a lot of knowledge exchange going on internationally at the G20 level with the European Commission, with our counterparts in France and the US in particular, and other groups and projects, particularly focusing on living labs in agriculture, which have, quite honestly, have really taken off in the last few years. And a lot of that activity has been following what we've been doing in Canada very closely, and engage, our knowledge exchange internationally has led to a strong leadership position for Canada in the domain. But it's not without its challenges. There's certainly a high level of impact of this kind of work, but some challenges that go along with it. The primary impact that we're looking to have is through this innovation process, developing practices and leading to greater adoption of those beneficial management practices that will provide those benefits and will ultimately help with the climate mitigation goals. And that's the primary impact. But we also see other beneficial impacts, such as this being in close touch with the producers increases the relevance of the scientific research that's happening. We see a lot of individuals and organizations connecting in ways that they were not connecting in the past, and building relationships that are very important. And that in turn has led to, we see good examples of strong network resilience in different provinces. We have good examples of that, where this coming together through this collaboration has benefits to these organizations beyond the work that they're doing in the living labs. We see that in PEI, where they faced a number of crises around hurricanes and COVID and so on. And then the partners came back and said, being in a living lab helped us weather those storms as a innovation ecosystem, as an industry, much better than we could have in the past. It generates other opportunities for participants through those connections, and it certainly has certain reputational benefits of the different organizations of being in part of this work. Some of the challenges we see, I mentioned right off the start about urgency, but as Sandra said, her last point was the change takes time. So it's finding this balance between, we're trying to do something urgently, but we have to find the patience to be able to help these relationships grow and the trust needed for this collaborative work to happen. These projects involve a lot of people. They are with our complex challenges, but also complicated projects. So just in terms of the number of meetings and things that have to happen, it's not, this is not trivial work to do this much collaboration. there's also a lot of data sharing going on across this network, and that has challenges, not just from a technological perspective, but in terms of from a human and legal perspective as researchers. There's a lot of other challenges. It's also just an innovation orientation challenge in terms of making sure that people are always focused on finding solutions. This is really a new way of working together collaboratively, and that takes some, some time to get used to, and kind of continual reinforcement of why we're trying to do it. And one of the things I always say to kind of keep this innovation orientation and is, I say, living labs are not research projects, they're innovation projects supported by research. And that's a key message in terms of how to push this work forward to make sure we're coming up with those solutions. So that's, I will leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McPhee. And for our last speaker, we will stop looking at the farms for a moment and concentrate on other aspects of the food value chain. So I think Dr. Sophie Bernard, who is a professor of environmental economics at Polytechnique Montréal, will tell us about food packaging, zero waste strategies, and circular economy. So Dr. Bernard, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, everyone online as well. I don't see my presentation. Okay, it's very small. Can you? Okay. So it's another topic. It's closer to the fork than the farm, but yes. So it's the issue of containers and packaging. I will talk about the issue itself and a report that we did with Equiterre on that topic, and another study on the consumer willingness to pay. So just to tell you, so this is how much we export waste in general in Canada. Okay. Well, okay. So the gray line, the one at the top, is the total export per year, and what you see at starting in 2013, 2017 is China that has blocked the import of our waste. So what you see at the end, well, we did decrease the amount of exportations, but there's an increase at the end. So we rely so much on exporting our waste, we're not able to handle that ourselves, and this is a huge problem. Is it possible that we switch again? So this is a report from Recyc Québec. Again, sorry, it's in French, but what you see, if you look at the right, like what is in blue is the quantity that we export as well. So this is from what we put in our recycle bin. So and I can convince you, if you look at your recycle bin, like a large amount of what you're putting in there is from the food industry. So it's a major, it's the most important contributor to what's going in there. And then, yeah, we export them a lot as well. And one last thing is this study, very interesting. So it shows it's the rebound effect of having recycling streams. So they say that curbside recycling increases household consumption. So they measure that with data in North Carolina and found that there's a 6 to 10% increase in the consumption. Because why? So because it's a guilt eraser. So we don't feel guilty to consumption. So we say, okay, it's handled, so we just don't really care. And yeah, there's many things that point that people will consume more in the just the mere presence of a recycling stream will make people to consume more. So this is not really a solution right now. Okay. So our study with Equiterre, this is the framework of the study. So we have performed a survey across Canada. We have 2,000 consumers that answered the survey. We did round tables and with other people from the distribution and the packaging industry. So we have like a quite large overview of what's going on and how to switch from single-use packaging to the bulk version. The bulk version means either we use our own packaging or own containers, or there's a deposit and refund system. So the retailer provides the containers and we pay for them and get reimbursed when we can come back with the container. So this is just to convince you that it's more like as soon as we use the container several times, it's more ecological than single-use packaging. I won't stay long on that. So one of the large questions is, are people ready to go bulk, to bulk purchase? This is what we get here. So if you look, the dark part, the black part is people that are not ready, but all the rest, they are ready. So in general, people are ready to buy in bulk, okay? Even if it asks for like more, like you have to bring the container back, you have to wash it or something like that. So people are willing to buy in bulk. Here I just present to you what could be the public measures to switch from single-use to bulk offers. What is preferred by the population, like the consumers here, but we can say that these are the voters. They prefer measures that will support business, advise, and ban when ban the packaging when the product don't need it. But you see at the bottom, when they feel directly impacted by the measure, they don't like it, so charge a fee to single-use containers. They don't like it, so there's a strategic bias here as well in the response. But just to say that there's plenty of measures that we could adopt as like to handle the collective action problem, and it's there. So from the reports, the recommendation, there's a lot of change in the legislative framework. When we did the roundtables, we could see that distributors, retailers, they believe that the others should move first and then they will move as well. But there's a big coordination problem. They think that consumers are not ready, but the consumers, they say, oh, well, if it was offered in my grocery store, I would definitely buy in bulk. So they all put the first step should be done by the others. So legislation would certainly help in coordinating the sector, okay? Other recommendations, but I will just go through to show you this last study. So within the same survey, so with 2,000 consumers, we ask what are you willing to pay for products in reusable containers. So this is what the question looked like. We had one question on almonds, one on condiments and liquid detergent, just to see how people react with maybe when there is no sanitary issue versus other things. So just for instance, the almond here, you had the base option, so the one you find in the supermarket, and you had one option with your own container and one with a container provided by the retailer. So we set, you see the blue line with the blue dot, so it's set at, I believe, $12, which is the retailer price at the supermarket, and people had to show what they were willing to pay for the different options compared to the base option. Okay, so what we obtain here, okay, yeah, so we do some regressions. We control for all sorts of socio-demographic characteristics, plus other latent variables like the type of stores they go to, the environmental beliefs, etc. Okay, so what we obtain, the main results in the blue rectangle is that in average, the willingness to pay for bulk products is smaller than the price that we get in a single-use product. So we believe that it's because, well, you have, as a consumer, you have to work more, you know, to carry the container and all, and you feel like you work for the grocery store because, okay, I'm doing it myself, I provide the container myself, so it should be cheaper. So people in general are willing to pay a smaller price. Okay, and in general, they are willing to pay a higher price for a deposit container compared to a personal container. But if you look at the distribution, you see that people that are willing to pay the most, they are actually willing to pay a premium to purchase in bulk. And if you compare with what the retailers are saying, for them it's a lot more work. They have, like, for instance, if you have a very traditional grocery store, let's say Provigo, they will have, if they have a section in bulk, very often they have to offer the same products in the single-use container, right? So they have to duplicate the floor area dedicated to, like, the same product. So this is very costly for sanitary reasons as well. It's like, do they have to hire somebody, especially for the bulk section? Will they let people just help themselves, or will they the employee do it? So it's a lot of question, and it's in competition with other regulations. For instance, in Quebec, we have very soon I don't know how they call that, but the enlarged deposit and refund for containers that's coming in September for all packaging smaller than 2 liters. So this means like the juice, milk, all that will be in a deposit refund system very soon. So they have already to manage that. They don't know how they will do that. They have to make room for the storage of all that. It's quite complicated. So if they had to do it as well, that would be an additional layer, and, well, quite complicated for them. So other results, we see that female women are willing to pay a bit more. If people with a university degree as well, active person, if they are already making bulk purchases, they are willing to pay more. Use car sharing vehicle, etc. There's a U-shaped influence of age, so younger people and older people are willing to pay more. Province of residence, Alberta, they are willing to pay less. you're laughing, but in the data, Alberta, people are today making more bulk purchase than Quebec. So we may laugh, but we're not that good. And here we have mixed results depending on the regressions. So family size, it's not clear, but often it's positive influence. Political positioning, right side. So if you're positioned at the right of the political scope, you're willing to pay more. Being like, so for some things we are clueless, like being born in Canada is a negative influence. Something maybe mixed result at the end, sense of easiness. So if you believe that it's easy to handle bulk products, then you are willing to pay less. Like you say, why would I pay more? It's easy to do. I won't pay more. Okay, so yet a lot of people prefer the voluntary basis instead of mandatory. I do prefer when it's mandatory, but that's. If you want a real transition, I believe we should go with the mandatory one. And there's an important role for the industry. People believe that it relies mainly on producers and retailers. So, and the big question is how to combine that with the production, and how will it impact the production, and like how much we package our stuff, and is it compatible with the bulk version of the system? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think it's best if I let the audience ask questions first. So we have about 10-ish, between 10 and 15 minutes for questions from the audience. So please raise your hand. Okay, we have many questions. Great.
Hi, my question is for Mr. Qualman. I want to hear your thoughts on the fact that you have clearly shown that there has been a significant increase in production of agricultural goods, but at the same time, in area like the St. Lawrence Valley, there is a significant decrease in the last 100 years on the number of acre under cultivation. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that contradiction in agricultural production.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think you've connected two real issues here. The loss of farmland to other uses, whether it's urban sprawl or golf courses or, roads, etc., it is a big problem. And it's something that we're very focused on, especially in central and eastern Canada. But the farmland area in Canada, it has decreased, but what we're doing is we're just producing so much more on each acre. We're doing that by using more inputs, more fertilizer, etc. So I think you are seeing local farmland loss effects, but overall that's being countered by just pushing more inputs into and more outputs out of the acres that we are farming.
Thank you for your answer, and thank you for your presentation.
We have other questions from the public.
Thank you for that. They were all fascinating presentations, so I thank you for that. I thank you for the information, the insights. There's just so much to think about. But as a historian, thinking about historical memory, there are two phrases that kind of struck me and created a certain amount of skepticism, and that I'm hoping that you can dispel. So my two questions, one's for Chris and one's for Sophie. Hopefully they're quick questions. Sophie, you said well, no, sorry, for Chris first. You said this is a new way of working. And of course, the first thing I thought about was the Dominion Experimental Farm System, more than 100 years worth of, from the history that I've worked with the Food and Agriculture Museum. It doesn't sound like a new way of working. So what's different between the living labs and the Dominion Experimental Farm? So that's one question. Let me just get the other one out of the way, and then I will ask you to answer it. Sophie, when you say people are willing to buy bulk, now being an old person, I remember the 70s and this mad rush of bulk everything. I mean, this is how No Frills started as a store. Everything was bulk for a while. It was hard to imagine. It was terribly messy, but there was this huge proliferation through the 70s. Partly, if I remember, it was the fuel crisis and also this new environmental awareness we had. And then there was all of this backsliding, and now all that we have left is bulk barn and, you know, the odd candy bin. So the question I have for you is there any research on why there was a backsliding then and how to prevent it now, this sort of expressed willingness to buy bulk versus the reality of, is it going to actually happen? So two different questions for two different people. Thank you.
All right, maybe Chris first, and then Sophie.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a great question. Like, it's always the thing. People come along and say everything. What I'm doing is new, and is it really? Where we see this being different is really in terms of bringing these different ingredients together. I think I talked about focusing on the farmer's needs. I think where we see something different is sometimes in the common approach is for us to do guess what farmers want in terms of solutions from research, for example, without meaningful discussion with them, without meaningful interaction. And farmers are innovators, and here they're innovating every day, and they may not be talking to these other people. So bringing all those people together to have a conversation together is genuinely a change for what's happening. And I think that's one of the measures. I say, it's a new way of working, but it really comes through the evidence that participants in our living labs tell us it's a new way of working. It's interesting that you mentioned the Dominion experimental farm approach. I work on one of those experimental farms. That's where my office is based. We do very little of our living labs work in those contexts. Those are primarily sort of controlled research environments where we sometimes do some sort of secondary control work, that kind of thing. But we're moving to do this work. This particular type of work is very important to do on the real farms, where the reality of these solutions, they kind of brush against real life, and you see, okay, well, fine, that solution was okay at a plot scale on an experimental farm, but when you actually bring this into an agricultural production system, you're going to have different challenges scaling up to an entire field scale, and the timing of different systems where those interact. Those kinds of things are really different. Another thing that comes to mind is all of these different organizations that are involved are, through this model, are working together. That has been a change for a lot of them. Sometimes different nonprofit organizations are working in a very competitive environment, almost working against each other at times. And this is a model where they're really working together on what is a funding opportunity, but a collaboration opportunity. And we hear from them that also is a change in the way it's working. So those are just some examples. I've probably spoken too long in the answer already, but it's a great question.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Well, when I think about how we should do, I think, like, what was it in 9000 and not the 70s, but I'm glad to know that. But one thing you mentioned that may be a part of the answer is the fuel crisis. I do believe that the lobbies, so the plastic lobbies, and as Darryl pointed out, maybe the fertilizer lobbies that all come from the oil industry, right? They all are all together in that. They do have like very strategic and strong impacts on the development of public policies and the way we can organize for collective actions. Sandra mentioned the cigarette industry. Well, the cigarette industry showed us how to, showed the lobbies how to work, how to massively finance research, research in intelligent packaging. Oh, wow, that's wonderful. Intelligent packaging, make people dependent even more on packaging so we can integrate. So I believe lobbies are part of the answers, and the way the government do not develop their own expertise enough within their their own people, and they rely on external like McKinsey and stuff like that to perform. This is, I believe, a major issue that slow down any transition that we would want to do in that. So maybe the fuel crisis explained that. It was more expensive to extract, more expensive to produce plastic. So we had just to go back to a simpler version of the system, and maybe a better version of the system as well.
Thank you. We'll take a few more questions.
Yes. Okay. My question is for you, Sophie. Tell me if I'm wrong, but the way I understood the research, we see that people they answer the survey thinking they are agreeing with bulk, but from the regression that you made, they are less willing to pay than, let's say, with the plastic packaging. The way I conclude this is, could it be that maybe they just don't really know what bulk means? Because like you mentioned, it would mean, for the first, let's say, the implementation of bulk would mean that the cost would be very higher. And also, it could also mean that less products available. So let's say we have the luxury here, and I'm not against bulk, but we have the luxury here of having oil from Italy, Greece, but if we have bulk, it's much harder to have many products like we have. So is it is it wrong to think that the survey takers, they don't really know what bulk means?
Well, they do know. Like in the context, we made very clear what we call bulk. So it's the two options I mentioned. So either you bring your own container or you use one from the retailer. And yeah, we had like plenty of questions. We had questions on why do you like packaging? Like it's easier to handle. You don't have to clean them. You have more information about the product. It's easy, for brands also to be to be different from the others. So yeah, and the willingness to pay. This is just one part. Like I can be ready to make bulk. So meaning that I'm ready to bring my own containers, for instance. I'm ready to have fewer different products. But like if we went bulk all the way, maybe we would have competition, like flour from this brand, this other brand, and we could choose. Like they would have to be inventive in the way they distinguish themselves, but this is just another way of thinking. But I do believe that there's competition issues, because if we have just regional, like let's say just Quebec or Canada, this is regional in our international food system, so it would be hard to make international competitors to like compete with us in a bulk version. And what would that mean? So maybe there's this issue, but I believe people answering the questionnaire were, they knew what they were willing to answer, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll take one last question from the audience and then we will wrap up this session.
Perfect, thank you. I just want to say thank you to all the presenters. They were really insightful presentations. I'll keep it very brief, and by brief I mean a couple words each from each presenter. My question to you guys is that it seems like the overarching concept and the overarching themes of every single presentation is currently the agricultural sector and the agricultural field is unsustainable. We need to work towards some form of change management and some form of resiliency to get to a more sustainable future. And so my question to all four of you guys are, in two to three words, what change management principles or change management terms really conceptualize what you believe is the most important for Canada to reach a sustainable and resilient food systems in the future?
Maybe I'll ask Sandra to reply first, and then whoever wants to continue.
I get to be the guinea pig here. I certainly can't say that in 2 to 3 words. I will clarify though, like I don't think we can say that it's unsustainable 100% right now, right? I think producers are at various stages of the sustainability kind of spectrum, and there are farmers who are doing some really good things with circularity and organic production and regenerative and different kinds of production, right? It's just a matter of that's not necessarily to the scale that we may want to see across the entire agri-food system. And then the idea of being resilient, like I think that is something, like resilience isn't an endpoint either, right? Like climate change is happening and farmers are more and more facing changes in precipitation, changes in natural disasters, floods, fires. That's going to increase in intensity and unpredictability. And so resilience is that continually being able to respond positively, right? To be able to withstand these big major changes, whether they're environmental or even global. So I mean, I think adaptive management is the key thing here, right? It's continually looking, continually assessing what's working well and figuring out what change needs to happen and then moving towards that. So I know that was longer than the 2 to 3 words, so I'll keep it there and I'll pass it along to the next person.
All right, in a few words, who wants to jump in?
I'll go. I'll try to stick to 3 words if you don't count the word "and," but because it's quite the core of the Living Labs approach. I will say accelerating innovation and adoption.
All right, thank you.
I'm happy to go next. I guess I would say get farmers off the treadmill. Farmers have spent the last 30 or 40 years constantly, relentlessly spurred to produce more, and that has led to higher and higher and higher input use and a whole bunch of unintended consequences. So we need to move to a point where farmers can be economically secure and secure on their farms without the constant spur to ever increasing production.
I would say comprehensive public policies.
All right, and that wraps up our session. So thank you, everyone. A big thank you to our panelists and to the audience as well for asking a lot of questions. We really appreciate that. So now it's time for a break. The next session will start at 11:30. So see you there. Thank you.
Hi, just trying to connect here with our presenter online. Is Assana present? Okay, no worries if not.
All right, welcome back everyone. We will continue this discussion about sustainability and food systems. This time we will focus on climate change and food systems. So our three panelists will discuss climate change impact on food systems and on communities, the need to transform agri-food systems, and they will discuss potential solutions for adaptation, such as the role of innovation. So first, I would like to give the floor to Megan Letourneau from the Department of Biology of McGill University. You have 10 minutes.
Okay, good morning. So my name is Megan. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate at McGill University. I work in molecular biology, and today I'm going to give you a brief overview of my thesis project, which is entitled Food for the Future, Transforming Camelina sativa into a Climate Stress-Tolerant Crop. So I'm going to start by giving a little bit of background and putting my work into the context of our current climate crisis. I'll then take you through the two main aims of my project and conclude with my upcoming plans and the anticipated outcomes of the work. So, as we've been discussing, food security is defined as having access to safe, sufficient, nutrient-dense foods that meet one's dietary needs. And unfortunately, this is a long-standing global issue that has only been further exacerbated by climate change. We are currently seeing record crop losses in the agricultural sector, namely due to lower instances of precipitation, drastic changes in climate, rising sea levels, and a lack of fresh water. And while there are many consequences of climate change that affect the agricultural sector, one of the most pressing stresses is the development of saline soils. So saline soils are soils which have accumulated a concentration of approximately 40 millimolars of sodium chloride and other dissolved salts. It's estimated that currently 20% of all cultivated land is affected by high levels of salinity, and this percentage is increasing every year. Once the salts are present in the soils, it then becomes extremely difficult and often inefficient to remove them, especially in communities with limited resources. So if we can't treat the soil, we must then turn our attention to the crops. And one of the most promising methods of dealing with saline soils is through the development of salt-tolerant crops using a process called plant transformation. So plant transformation is a process in which we can introduce a new gene suspected of conferring a desired trait into the crop of our choosing. So we first have to carefully select target genes, then overexpress them in those crops, and then analyze the resulting phenotype. So this ultimately allows for the creation of crops with specific targeted qualities that are designed for unique environments, such as saline soils. So with that in mind, I will introduce the crop that I am working on, which is Camelina sativa. So I'm focusing on the transformation of Camelina sativa, which is an oiled seed crop of the Brassicaceae family. It's closely related to Arabidopsis thaliana and similar to flaxseed. Camelina has a really unique oil profile such that its omega-3 levels are far surpassing more widely used vegetable oils, which gives it really exciting potential for use as an essential fatty oil supplement in food insecure communities. So this makes Camelina a prime candidate for optimization in saline soils, leading me to summarize the objective of my project, which is to develop transgenic lines of Camelina that are salt tolerant while adapting a protocol that may be used for other abiotic stresses in a similar way. So I'll now take you through the first aim of the project, which was the genetic transformation. So before we transform the plants, we first have to select target genes. And so my project focuses on two classes of genes, the first of which are exapted transposable elements, or ETEs for short. So these are sequences of DNA which were once mobile within the genome that have since lost their ability to transpose and become domesticated by the host, often conferring a novel trait, often in response to stress. And the second class are long non-coding RNAs, which were often thought of as having little biological relevance, but are now shown to be involved in various levels of regulation, including stress response. So following various bioinformatic analyses, we selected 6 ETEs and 9 non-coding RNAs to be transformed in camelina. So with those genes in hand, I then performed the transformation using something called an agrobacterium-mediated floral dip protocol. So essentially, we construct tDNA or binary vectors. So these are vectors which each have one of those unique gene of interest that I selected, as well as markers and other genes that essentially help cut out my gene of interest and insert it into camelina's genome. So we grew these vectors inside of bacteria, and this was coordinated with the growing of a large number of plants in my greenhouse. And at the point of flowering, they were physically dipped into the bacterial solution in order to uptake the genetic material. So following the floral dip, plants are grown in regular greenhouse conditions until the time of harvesting, and then they were harvested on an herbicide medium. So the idea is only the plants which have my gene of interest, as well as the selectable markers, are able to survive on these plates. So we can see that most of them are able to germinate, but die within a few days. But there's a couple that continue to grow, they're larger in size, a nice green color, and so this is a good indication that they have my gene of interest, and so these would have been verified by PCR and then transplanted to be grown out to the next generation. So I was ultimately able to successfully transform 11 out of the original 15 genes. And this process of screening and growing out was repeated over several generations in order to stabilize that gene's background. And now, many generations later, we have hundreds of sublines, many of which have a 100% incorporation rate. So you can see here on the more recent herbicide plate. And this process of developing the stable transgenic lines took up about the first 2 years of my research. So now, having completed the development of the transgenic lines, I'm at the more exciting stage of being able to quantify their altered stress response in saline soils. So the first part of doing this was to develop a salt stress protocol adapted for greenhouse and growth chamber settings. So this is wild-type camelina in increasing concentrations of salt. So we can see that even at relatively low concentrations, the growth becomes stunted, and then nothing can really survive past 200. So this gave me an idea of what concentrations I should be looking at specifically for camelina. And I have since completed 6 salt trials, so I'll take you through some of the results. Here we have a picture from one of my growth chamber screenings, and I'm looking at a wide range of parameters. So the growth of the plants, pod development, the seed yield, the photosynthetic health, all of which are really important parameters to be looking at. Here we have some of the corresponding seed yields from that screening trial. So this was an early trial looking at a large number of lines, smaller sample sizes, so larger errors, but it still gave us a good indication of what some of the lines were doing. So the last bar of each group is wild type. So we can see that in both normal and in salt conditions, there are several transgenic lines that are outperforming wild type. So this was a promising preliminary result for us. This is what some of the plants looked like in that trial. So this is at 225 millimolars of salt. So we can see wild type, very sad looking, small pods, generally with no viable seeds, compared to 4 other of my core transgenic lines that are able to continue growing. They have nice viable seeds inside despite being grown in a high concentration of salt. Moving on to a more recent trial conducted in the greenhouse, we are seeing that many of the transgenic lines have an increased survival 2 weeks post-stress compared to wild type. So again, the last bar of each group is wild type. So at 175, we only had about 17% of surviving plants for wild type, which is less than all of the other transgenic lines, and nothing could survive at 225 compared to 4 other lines which continue to have surviving plants. These are what some of those plants looked like. So in the greenhouse, we use larger pods, bigger plants. This is a little bit of a better proxy for maybe what we would see in the field. On your left, you can see this is line 10, a line which has significantly overperformed throughout all of the trials. So this is in increasing concentrations of salt. So we can see that not only can the transgenic line survive in salt, but it's also surviving with only small differences between the treatments. And this is, of course, in contrast to our SAD wild type, which is almost entirely dead at 175, compared to, again, 4 of our other core transgenic lines. So these are all some promising results that we will ultimately use to determine which transgenic lines are showing the greatest salt tolerance. And so now I'll just conclude with some of my upcoming plans and the anticipated outcomes of the work. So we are currently in the process of installing an integrated phenomics platform in the greenhouse. This is an automated system that allows us to gather a wide range of data from the plants using numerous imaging stations. So I hope to be able to incorporate this into the project in the near future. In the meantime, I've begun a molecular characterization of the lines, namely through sequencing, in order to better elucidate the mechanism behind the salt tolerance that we're seeing. So we ultimately anticipate finding numerous transgenic lines of camelina that have an enhanced salt tolerance and aim to develop a protocol that could ideally be used in similar crop transformation programs as we continue to adapt and innovate in response to climate change. So with that, I will thank you for your time and thank you to all of my lab members. That's it.
Thank you, Megan. So for our next panelist, I invite Tarran Maharaj from the Department of Sociology at the University of Windsor.
Hello, thanks for being here. I am in my second PhD. My first one was in social innovation, where I did a lot of background work, and then I switched to a PhD in sociology, where I'm actually putting my research into practice. So. There we go. So I'm just looking at climate change and how it affects indigenous food systems, and then it trickles down to the individual. So as an immigrant of color, I begin by acknowledging that I am on indigenous land, and I thank you for the opportunity to live, work, and study on your land. And as a fellow post-colonized, globally indigenous body, I ask your permission to stand in empathetic solidarity with you. And I also want to bring this in because racism is really a very unwelcome guest, quite notably across academia, but also in the fields. And when I say the fields, not just the farming fields, where we have a high percentage of migrant farm workers who are doing the labor for us to be all fed as Canadians. So it really is, it does not exist, but it is a social construction, and it has severe negative side effects. So in this presentation today, I will be highlighting the cause, the modern day colonization, the effects of climate change, and the impact it has on indigenous food systems, which gushes down to the individual. At the end, being solution-oriented, I will also present a socially innovative approach geared towards addressing these issues and decolonizing academia via my on-campus socio-pedagogical food systems program. So what is global indigeneity? And it really is, it's rooted in the historical atrocities of colonialism, decimated through illegal land acquisition, systemic violence, oppression, domination, and the socio-cultural extermination of communities, including but not limited to religion, languages, beliefs, food systems, etc. And yet, the reason why I call for the decolonization of academia is with the abolishment of slavery followed by the introduction of indentured laborers, a legally and politically correct term for slavery, and only as recent as 1996, with the last closing of the residential schools in Canada, there is still very little work present from scholars of these ancestral groups in academia. So as we approach the first quarter of the 21st century, academia continues to be predominantly white, with theories, methodology, research approaches, and writing styles being restricted to approval and acceptance of the governing experts situated in the global north. hence the call for the decolonization, which this then trickles down to how we treat colonized bodies in system and in food systems. So, in the past, colonization, we enter the land, we disseminate, we take. Modern day colonization, it's now you enter the land and, well, there's a war, you put sanctions on the country, and then you destroy the land, and then he says, well, we can rebuild your country for you. We'll take oil, we'll take whatever it is, natural resources you have, and we'll go from there. So Goodiness in his book writes, can you just expand that? Okay. So the reason how this affects systems and food bodies, okay, it's Goodiness notes that extractivism of natural and communal resources in the global south, I believe it can also be equally juxtaposed to the global east, is happening at an extravagant and alarming rate. Further to this, he notes that ideals for extractivism, such as financial, cultural, musical, and epistemological, generate all kinds of confusion. One, we can look at international students where there's a huge financial extraction for them to be here in Canada. The other one, when we look at food systems, if we look at quinoa and Peru, where the land has been ravaged and returned to nothingness, we now grow quinoa in Alberta, and yet the indigenous people in Peru, where quinoa originated, they are now without quinoa. If we look at the Philippines, where 50 tons of Canadian garbage was sent, destroying an entire coconut plantation, it was at the same time Canada was opening migrant farm workers from the Philippines to come to Canada. So it's a really nasty world out there, to say the least, to be polite. So, climate change on indigenous people, I took this from the United Nations list, and we have it from the east to the west to the north to the south, from the Kalahari Desert to the Himalayas, Amazon, Arctic region, Finland, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Caribbean, South America, North America. And indigenous people are amongst the first to face consequences of climate change due to their dependence upon and close relationship with the environment and resources. Climate change excavates the difficulty that already faced by indigenous communities, such as political and economic marginalization, loss of land and resources, and an impediment on their human rights. When we look at food poverty and modern-day colonialism, it's across the board, from interspecies, from animals, but it starts at childhood, and when the child grows up being poor, then it just leads into a much more greater social deviance, social issues that we can't feel, or that we won't know. From these, I've extracted the 3 A's of food poverty. That's unaffordability, unavailability, and inaccessibility. And so now approach. So a socially innovative approach, or SIA, is not just interdisciplinary, but also sensorially interconnected. So you see, you touch, you feel, you go through the emotions of food systems. An SIA allows for research to be seen through numerous and diverse lenses. Hence, research need not be formal. It is a ceremony for improving my relationship with an idea. It takes place every day, and it has taken place throughout history. And there's this little pictogram from the Sanskrit of the 6 blind people, and they all have blindfolds on, and they all touch the one same thing, which is the research, which is food poverty. But if you're blinded by one thing, all you're going to see is one thing only. But if you take the blinders off and you step back, you're going to see it is an elephant. It's not a spear or a tail or a fan or anything. So I think I'm running out of time. Okay, so putting policy into research, I have spent a lot of time in researching and create an on-campus food system program. It is putting policy, my research, into practice, which is participation. Interconnecting bodies and identities through food, they become hermeneutical pedagogues. And researching the otherness, we collectively and holistically engage in practicing equality, diversity, inclusion, and equity, what I refer to as EDI. So globally in indigenous food systems, I see my program as an approach that is empowering to the students as we collectively engage in practicing EDI. This then allows to lead to the creation of a safe atmosphere for the production and distribution of knowledge as it draws on one's space, place, and identity. In this program, we prepare food together. We cook together, we eat together. It starts off with a theoretical part for about 15 minutes, and then we spend about 30 minutes where we cook and eat. And this is how we share, it's how you learn through the person and not reading a book about someone in the Kalahari Desert. You're actually speaking to someone from the Kalahari Desert. And this is real life, it has happened. I've experienced it in my program. As food is prepared and cooked and consumed in an on-campus food literacy and food kinship environment, shared recipes are brought to life in a convivial, peaceful, and emotionally warm atmosphere. It gives the international student, those globally indigenous bodies, an opportunity to feel comfortable, to feel warm, to feel at home, for lack of a better word. And at an self-reflective experiential learning level, it produces a membrane resulting in the development and construction of a humane support system. So this is part one of my work. I just came back from a really magnificent vacation in Anguilla, and the next part is looking to get seeds to send to Anguilla, because since the Hurricane Omar ravaged the island, there's a lot of loss, and maybe we can talk later, because there's a lot of sea breeze in the air, and it affects the soil and the crop and everything. So the next project that I have, since I'm back here now, it's really looking to get some sponsors to get seeds to send to them so that they can start rebuilding their agricultural system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And lastly, I would like to welcome Assana Ndam from the Université de Marois online, if we have Assana online. No. Well, while we wait, we can start the Q&A period. That will mean more time to grill you with questions. So we'll take questions from the audience. We'll have a bit more time for questions.
I see one back here.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. Maybe just a question about like salt-tolerant crops. Usually when you change a plant, like to make it more resistant to something and like it grows more, there's trade-offs, like there's some things in the plant that are gonna grow less, or just because of this trade-off in the plant that's happening. Is there any trade-offs to the plant? So like it's growing more, but are there other parts of the plant in the life cycle that are just going worse?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, it's definitely something that is a challenge for developing transgenic lines. And of course, at this stage in their development, they have herbicide resistance, which is something that would not be valuable for a lot of producers. In terms of the phenotype of my plant, there has been no trade-off yet. One thing that happens with transgenic lines is that over several generations, depending on how many copies of that insertion there was, the genome can become unstable and it can silence other genes, which could definitely affect other parts of the life cycle of the plant. I'm still at a relatively early stage, so I haven't seen any of that yet, which is nice for me so far. But yeah, it's definitely a consideration in the development of salt-tolerant crops and other transgenic lines.
Yeah, we'll take a question. I think in front you were first, and then we'll go in the back.
Okay, thank you. Megan, do you have comparison in nutritional values between the prior to genetically modified plant and the new the new plant?
Yeah, a good question. My background was actually in nutrition, so it's not something that I know as of yet, but one of the final experiments that is planned for my PhD is in oil analysis. So really the value in camelina is in the oil. And so we would like to see if there's any difference in the lipid profiles. So I don't know as of yet, but in direct comparison between the seeds, there doesn't seem to be any differences. But yeah, it's something that we'll definitely look at.
And a follow-up question. I know you mentioned how it was good with regards to omega-3s, but why this plant and not other plants, since we're modifying them genetically to be resistant to salt? Should we aim for other plants that we use more often?
Yeah, and you know, lots of plants that we do use are being genetically modified. I think the reason that I and my lab is focusing on camelina is because it's really a crop that it was used a lot in the past, and then it kind of, you know, lost out to canola and other things, but it really has so much potential such that its omega-3 levels are far surpassing canola and safflower and sunflower oils, and that is really valuable for food insecure communities. It's an essential fatty acid. A lot of people don't get enough of it from their diet, and so that is why we focused on it. And aside from that, it's a relatively robust crop that has flexible growing conditions, so it would be easy in that sense for some producers to implement it. So yeah, that's some of the reasons why we chose to focus on it.
Thanks. We have another question in the back here.
Thank you. My question is for Megan as well. Sorry, we're barraging you here. I was wondering, so I noticed that in your results, the salt conditions that you were showing were for 225. And so I just wondered how the crop performed at higher levels of salt concentrations if you tested for that.
Yeah, so it was kind of a bit, not trial and error, but you saw that we checked in wild type what generally the conditions are for decrease in survival. And so we saw that generally around 200 millimolars is where camelina starts to die. I have tested the seeds at 300 and it's too high. So they can't survive that much, but it's okay. I'm happy with 225 for now. But yeah, above that, it seems like they can't really survive. Of course, at a certain point, you know, no matter how strong the transgenics are, sometimes it's just too much salt. So, but we have to also remember that these are concentrations much higher than what we would see in the soil. So we're already overshooting based on what we would see in the field. So it's still promising in that way.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm just going to interrupt. Our last presenter, I believe, has just appeared.
All right, then we'll welcome Assana Ndam from the University of Marois. You have 10 minutes for your presentation. If you want, you can share your slides from your side, or you should be able to do that.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you understand me. Are you understanding me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Ndam Assana. I'm a PhD student in the University of Marois, Cameroon. So my item is about essays on the effect of the regulation in agricultural innovation in sub-Saharan Africa. You have to be more, my English is not very well. I'm a Francophone. So I have to try to speak in English, present in English. So let me go to the speed of the point. So today, family farming account for 80% of the world food productions and provide job for 1.3 billion person people in rural area that are extremely poor and living in with less than $1.25 per day. So these small farmers are characterized by low market integrations, allow access in few assets, land area between 1 and 2 area. And most of them are found in sub-Saharan Africa. So when we, in the early stages of development of most European countries, they are relied on agricultural growth. It's the same like North America, Japan, or recently East Asia. But it's not the same in Africa. Africa is have the lowest yields in the world because of recurrent disasters, excessive use of lands, water, and food products. And the number of poor continue to grow in sub-Saharan Africa. And the World Bank says that if anything is doing between now and 2015, there is not enough food to feed this population. Activities like activities of human like agriculture, leading to deforestation, environmental pollution, and contributing to 30% of global greenhouse emission in agriculture. So, have an impact in climate change. So this climate change have also an impact on local systems with long dry season and flash flood, which make harvest inconsistent and livelihood of smallholders farmers in sub-Saharan Africa uncertain. And this small-scale farmer benefits a little about reform of investments or about state support because of idiosyncratic and covariant risks that are difficult to control, particularly when it's about adopting innovations. Nowadays, there are small farmers are the hardest hit by weather phenomena, rising fertilizer and input prices, soaring world prices for agricultural products and energy, and more recently, the Russian-Ukrainian crisis. But the state regulation could lead sub-Saharan African countries towards structural transformation. Because of the small-scale farmers are the person who allocate the scarce resources they possess to respond to recurring food crises. However, this regulatory is uncertain and there are long approval time discourages private investment, and delay the introduction of new technology. And these regulatory frameworks are vary considerably between countries and do not permit adoption of innovation. What is innovation? Schumpeter said that innovation is a set of new products and new methods that replace what exists before, and in so doing, destroy established interest. But why Schumpeter says that crucial role of entrepreneur and technological innovation in economic development are the case of the crucial role of economic development. There is not the same about other school of thought. The school of thought of classical school said that they agree that importance of technological innovation in economic growth, develop theory, but they still stipulate that competition, dissemination, and imitation are not permitted to monopolize new knowledge because for a long period, because eventually it becomes a public good. The new classical view say that the capacity to innovate was also seen as a driving for growth, but it was felt that market might not be able to allocate resources efficiently. And we need the institutional to stimulate innovation. Is the same of the evolutionary approach that said that technological innovation are the driving for beyond long-term economic development. But we need improvement of institution. And there is not a long process linear innovation, invention, innovation, diffusion, but it's a complex system that is interconnected. connected. So then we can, that's why adoption of innovation in sub-Saharan Africa are so difficult, because there's significant gap between the time when an innovation is developed and available on the market and the time when it's widely used by small family farmers, because of these multiple constraints that we have said earlier. So social learning can help them, but it could not be sufficient. So we can distinguish technological innovation to increase yield, to reduce cost, to reduce risk, and so on. But we can distinguish innovation like technological innovation, organizational innovation, financial innovation, etc. So all these obstacles of the adoption and dissemination of innovation by small-scale farmers are in the literature, are widely explained in the literature. So we are not focalized here, but we are explaining it in our works. So what we have to say is that because of these obstacles, so sub-Saharan people, small-scale farmers are adopting innovation at the last times of the where innovation is stabilized. Or Koshran or Schumpeter or Rogers say that exception of small-scale early adopters who have high levels of education and wealth will make them benefit from technological change. Followers, laggards, and non-adopters benefit a little of innovation. All these obstacles require not only institutional innovation, but also costly public investment in infrastructure, human capital and research, market sophistication. So it will involve it will involve the policy, the regulatory policy of our countries in sub-Saharan Africa to invest in small-scale farmers, because they are the guardian of our system of production. That's what we estimate that the last literature speak about all the constraints about the innovation, about the adoption of innovation in sub-Saharan Africa, but they are speaking a little about what to solve the problem. So that's why we said we think that to resolve the problem, we have to see the effect of the regulation in innovation in sub-Saharan Africa. So our problem research. So the major issue of linking agricultural modernization in sub-Saharan Africa is starting in 1618, that we have to transfer technology in a rich country and adapt to the local country. This program reach a certain category of farmer, and the states neglecting the quality of portfolio. That's why this program failed. The 18 and the 19, therefore dominated by the ideology of liberalization, the state have to disengage, and the market have to ensure the adoption of innovation. But our market are absent of the private sector is absent because of large risk that presents rural area. So Keynesian and public choice estimate that the role of the states are important to motivate the welfare, but the heterodox and public choice state of school state that the state are not able to regulate the state are not regulate to make the good choice for all people, because when states are democratic, they do not exercise their power for the general interest. But now, they're redefining the role of the state in response to sustainability. So that's why we want to know the effect of the institutional regulation on the adoption of agricultural innovation in sub-Saharan Africa. We have to say that the technology that are transferred to European to African country are supported by the intervention of public development banks in 1618. But when the program is failed, they withdraw their support. So the public development bank loans and heads attaching to the condition to their support, but in the literature, the power they wield over the policies of this country are criticisms. So nowadays, there are common methodological basis, the concept of additionality. That's why that we estimate that we have to. Hello?
Your time is over, so okay. I will stop you now so we can still have some time to discuss, and
Yes.
The audience can ask you questions if they want to know more. All right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go back to the Q&A. I think we have a little bit less than 10 minutes now. So please maybe direct your questions to Tarran and Assana. Otherwise, I have one if no one has a question. Yeah, Sophie in front.
Hi, thank you. Tarran, I'd like to ask you, so you say that you start those cooking sessions, the multi-indigenous cooking session with a theoretical approach. Could you tell us a bit more, walk us through what it could look like?
Yeah, so when I call for the decolonization of academia, when I call for the decolonization, I am not saying to forget or eradicate everything that exists. I'm calling for an inclusion, right, of theories and from the global south and the global east. And if we have such a high percentage of international students who are here, and when I read the news every day, you see, you know, there was one food bank in Ontario that put up a sign, no international students. Yet when you look back at the Canadian household, where over 50% of food waste comes from the Canadian household, what is wrong? Something is missing between having a student pay $40,000 at an undergrad level or $72,000 at a PhD level in Ottawa, yet they are hungry. It's not, something is missing. So I did a lot of research and I figured out a way to address it, because I will never be able to solve it, I admit that, is to seek funding to have this program. So I run this program now. It's my funding is up for renewal. I'll know in a few days. It's at the University of Ottawa. It's a CSL part, so 30% of the grades if they complete it for 8 weeks, right? They come in, they do the stuff, then they write a reflective paper, a self-reflective experiential learning paper. It counts for 30% of the grades, but 90% or 99% of the ingredients of the food is used. It's the input comes from international students. It comes from the global east. It comes from the global south. It comes from wherever they are from. And I have seen the success of it, and the people have spoken. That's why it was renewed last year, and I think it's going to be renewed for the fall semester. So that's what I do. I've tried doing it here in Montreal, but I was not successful. Sorry.
I see another question here.
And thank you all for the wonderful presentations. Questions for Assana, if you're still on. I was just wondering if you could describe the outlook that you have, for example, in Cameroon or Sub-Saharan Africa, in regards to agricultural innovation. Because I know you said that there's currently a lack of adoption, but I was wondering if you could just share your thoughts on what you see in the coming years.
Please, I don't understand very well. Can you please repeat, please?
If you could just share your outlook on what you think the coming years will look like, the next 5 years, 10 years in terms of adoption of agricultural innovation in either Cameroon or sub-Saharan Africa?
Yes. I don't understand. It's very, 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 very. Can you go it slowly? Because my English is not best.
Maybe I can rephrase in French, if that helps.
Yes, maybe.
Les innovations qui viennent dans l'avenir en Cameroun ou dans l'Afrique subsaharienne.
Oui. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez que je demande par rapport aux innovations? Si c'est par rapport à ces innovations, elles existent. Il y a des innovations sur le plan, en fait, de nos jours, on parle d'innovation agricole du genre durable, parce que maintenant, la production et la consommation ne sont pas durables et ça a des impacts sur notre climat. Et aujourd'hui, on ne doit plus être en train de réfléchir, il faut prendre des mesures directives. Donc, des mesures ont déjà été prises. Mais maintenant, il faudrait qu'on sache à quel niveau est-ce qu'on se situe. Comme je l'ai dit plus tôt, beaucoup a été dit dans la littérature par rapport à ce qui a été comme problème pour les innovations agricoles. Mais très peu ont été faits pour résoudre le problème. Et même quand cela a été fait, ça a été, comment on dit ça? Ça n'a pas été pour tous les pays d'Afrique subsaharienne, ça a été pour certains pays et dans certaines régions d'Afrique subsaharienne. Donc, il est question pour moi, dans mes travaux de recherche, de plutôt savoir à quel niveau est-ce qu'on se situe par rapport à ce qui a déjà été fait, ce qui doit être fait pour résoudre tous ces problèmes-là. Et cela passe par la réglementation. Donc, je suis déjà à ce stade de ma recherche. Pour la réglementation des institutions, j'ai déjà recensé tous les textes de loi qui me permettront les textes de loi, par exemple, concernant les indicateurs géographiques, par exemple, je les ai déjà recensés. À quel niveau est-ce qu'on se situe avec les indicateurs géographiques? Puisque de nos jours, il faudrait que chaque localité soit attachée à ses origines. En fait, que ce qu'on produise soit attaché à nos origines. Donc, j'ai déjà recensé tous les textes concernant les indicateurs géographiques et comment cela a déjà été adopté en Afrique subsaharienne. Actuellement, ce que je suis en train de faire, c'est recenser tous les textes de loi concernant l'agriculture durable, l'agroforesterie, l'agroécologie. Ça, c'est la partie concernant ce qui a été déjà fait, en fait, par rapport... et là, j'utilise la base de données de la FAO-LEX. Maintenant, pour les indicateurs géographiques, j'ai utilisé la base de données d'origine. Et j'ai annexé à cela les données sur la qualité de la réglementation en Afrique, sur la qualité, sur les types de lois en Afrique. Et là, j'ai utilisé la base de données du World Development Indicator. Ça, c'est ce qui concerne la réglementation. En ce qui concerne les innovations, j'ai utilisé le document de l'OMPI, l'Organisation mondiale de la propriété intellectuelle, et qui me disait où est-ce que je devais chercher ces bases de données, par exemple, sur le capital humain. Tout cela, j'ai toujours regardé dans le World Development Indicator, le World Governance Indicator, les données sur le marché, l'association du marché en Afrique subsaharienne, les données sur le capital humain et la recherche. Oui. Bon. C'est déjà ça pour la première partie de mon essai.
Je ne vais pas te couper une seconde fois, mais je vais résumer en anglais aussi parce que c'est une conférence anglophone. But just as Assana was telling us, I don't know if everyone understood, but was telling us about the importance of looking at what the regulations are regarding innovation in Cameroon and sub-Saharan Africa. So we'll take another question if there's one from I see one there from Régis, I think.
Thank you. I have actually two questions, one for Tarran, and if you allow me, one for Megan. So for Tarran, I'm curious about your perspective on the potential effect of eating the food from one's culture on the overall performance. Like, did you notice an improvement in the overall educational outcomes for students that were participating in indigenous food?
So once, what I've observed or what I've noticed, what I've read in their reflections, right? It's, I had students from China and they made dumplings. And it's kind of like, it's, you know, really heartwarming that, you know, we've made these dumplings and we've shared it with our friends. So I had students from Nigeria and they made a jollof rice, and it was the first time that they were sharing this jollof rice. Even though being in Canada for over 3 years and having all these friends on Facebook or whatever, it was the first time actually sharing their culture, their taste with everyone. And in terms of participation, in terms of changing their grade, I can't comment on that, but in terms of having a sense of belonging, having a feeling of being here, and actually sharing your culture, which is, you know, what I use the hermeneutic of pedagogues, definitely it excelled.
Thank you. If you allow me for Megan, I'm interested about property right. So you're developing this wonderful species for making oil. How does it work when it comes to putting it on the market? Like, can all farmers access this seed, or will there be a monopoly for the innovator for a certain amount of time? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that I haven't really fully thought out yet. Of course, there's a lot of steps before implementing a lot of regulations and whatnot when it comes to transgenics, but it's certainly something that I plan to patent. So the seeds would be patented, and yeah, it becomes stuff with intellectual property and all of that. So it's definitely something I need to look more into in terms of how it would be distributed. Of course, the goal of developing it was so that it would be available to anyone who required it, any community that could benefit from it. And so that would certainly be the core value in trying to implement it if it's in my hands. But I think that there's probably many steps along the way to getting there. So thank you.
While we wait for maybe one last question before our lunch break, I just wanted to pitch into what you just said, in the sense that one of the issues that we have as well is research being like sold sometimes to the private sector. So I think that's something to consider for all of us. So I think we will wrap up the session for now. So thank you everyone for your participation, for your questions. Now it's time for the lunch break. So thank you for being with us for this panel.
For those of you online, we're going to be closing down the Zoom and the live stream. Oh, we'll be keeping the Zoom open, but we'll be closing down the live stream. So hang tight, and we will be back in an hour with our next panel. Thank you, everyone.